This is a brief lecture to accompany the readings assigned for week 7. The main reading you're doing this week is Chapter 8 in O'Leary and Hunt, which is on producing effective deliverables. So I realize that may seem like we're moving a little too fast here because most of you are probably still in the midst of your research. But I think it's good to have a preview of what lies ahead, and this is a good chance to remind you that in a couple weeks here, you do have a partial draft of the capstone report that is due. I want to start today with something that is, as you all know, a key concept in any communication endeavor: audience. Such a simple concept that can be so hard to teach, understand, and learn. These are a collection of images that illustrate the concept in my mind. These images emphasize that audience can take multiple forms. Often we think of the big crowd as in the top left-hand image. But especially in workplace settings, some of our most important audiences are those that we engage with in close interpersonal interactions, as indicated in some of these other images here. And I have a little personal anecdote to illustrate what not to do when you're thinking of your audience. So this is going to take some explaining, but a couple years ago, my kids came home from school and there was a note that had been sent home asking parents to vote on the new start and end times that would be applied to middle school and elementary school for the following year. And there was 2 different sets of choices. Well, my daughter was in middle school at that time. My son was in elementary school. So they each had their own opinion of which choice would be better. And they were fighting about it and both trying to convince me, and I needed to make dinner and stuff. And so I finally said, I sent them off to their rooms and I said, okay, you each have 30 minutes to come up with a compelling argument, and then you can both present your arguments and try to convince me. Well, this little picture I have here tells the whole story. Basically, my son came up with this argument on this piece of paper. He said, I got things to do and places to be, and that was his argument. And then it's ripped in half and put back together with tape because his sister's argument was basically just consisted of tearing up his argument. But in any case, the main message here is that they both made arguments that entirely revolved around benefits to themselves. So he wanted to argue why a certain start time or finish time would give him more time to play video games after school and get his homework done. She wanted to argue that getting home earlier for her would allow her to get change clothes and go to the barn and ride horses sooner. So anyway, either one is effective, and I ended up voting how I wanted to vote anyway, what was best for me. But the point is, that's the absolute worst way to make an argument, and the worst way to think of audience is by emphasizing benefits to yourself. Obviously, the most successful argument, and this is true in a workplace document just as in any other document, is where you meet your audience on their own terms and give them something that they want. So, you got to find a way to sandwich things in there that are going to benefit you. But at the end of the day, you need to convince your audience that taking the action you want them to take is going to benefit them as well. And that is, just on the whole, that is an effective, I think, analogy for workplace arguments and how to make them effective. So, moving forward, how do you write a report that reaches your audience, meets them where they are, and moves you thus towards your desired outcome? This textbook offers some practical advice that echoes some advice I have been giving students for many years. Imagine yourself having a conversation with your reader and then proceed accordingly. And then this slide, this is just copied from the textbook, but this talks about some of the questions you might ask. So tell me, what's your research about? Why did you choose this topic? What do you hope to achieve? And can you fill me in on some background? How did you do your research? What did you find out? And what should we do now? And honestly, that is a very simple little set of questions there, but I find it an extremely valuable heuristic for how to write a document like this. So, and then this slide presents the same information that's presented in Table 8.1 in your textbook. This is a straightforward, no-nonsense overview of the 2 different types of documents that are discussed in this chapter: academic essays and professional reports. The only item I don't necessarily agree with is the last one, readership. Some academic articles can have pretty wide audiences and some professional reports can have pretty small audiences, so I'm not sure where they came up with that distinction. Nonetheless, I think this is a great overview of the differences between these two document types. And it's appropriate to this class where I know that some of you are conducting your research in a manner that will allow you to write up your results for both audiences. And I would add, I think it's a valuable skill set to know how to adapt your written and oral presentations to both of these audience types. So this is another useful element in this chapter. It's kind of a summary of topics we've already covered. But I especially like what the textbook says about the recommendations section of a workplace report. To be practical and actionable, recommendations should also demonstrate contextual awareness and link to win-win outcomes. There is a wisdom here related to what I think is one of the most important and fundamental principles of effective leadership. Choose your battles. It is better to present recommendations that are realistic and will advance you a little bit towards your end goal than to present pie-in-the-sky recommendations that you know will not ever be accepted by your audience and might even cause you to completely alienate them. So to wrap things up, I've put in this week's learning module an example of a brief professional report that I co-authored a little more than 1 year ago. A really large part of my administrative work as Associate Dean involves compiling information and then writing, co-writing, reviewing, or editing documents just like this one. This particular report is a culmination of some research my colleagues and I were asked to do last summer regarding a software package called Academic Analytics that universities can use to track faculty productivity. I don't expect you to read the whole document unless you get so caught up in the excitement that you just can't help yourself. But I do think it's a good example of a brief professional report, structured similar to your capstone report, although this one is a little less formal and not as in-depth as your capstone projects will be. So that's it for this week's lecture. I wish you the best as you continue collecting, analyzing, and now writing your data. And if I haven't said this before, I really think in most cases, those 3 phases, even though we're addressing them separately in the textbook and in the class, those are 3 phases that really should occur simultaneously and sort of recursively. So you collect some data, you analyze it, you write about it, and then that tells you what additional data you need to collect. So in any kind of research project, I always advise that you don't put off writing until the end. It's kind of an artificial divide to think that you do a bunch of research and then you write it up. I really encourage you to think of these processes as simultaneous and recursive. Thanks, and I hope you have a great week.